Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome today to Francis and Friends. And we have a great panel. I have a great program planned, and I'm anxious to get started. Someone introduce Jim Nations. It's great to have you with us today,
Great to be here. Always great to be here. Always an honor. And remember, I'll be ministering at Family Worship Center Sunday night. So
that's going to be a treat. Oh, good. And then we have Brother Dave Smith that's with us tonight. And Dave, did you have an announcement you would like to make?
Yes, I do. Good to be here today, and we're living in exciting times.
Yes, we are.
The potential is phenomenal. I will be teaching in one of the pre-camp sessions, 1 o'clock Monday, Selfishness and the Cross.
Wow.
So looking forward to that.
Sounds great, Dave. And then our special guest today is John Rosenstern, and we're so thrilled to have him with us. We're going to be discussing something today that I think that you have probably heard about, but we want to explain to you a little bit further and make sure that you understand what's taking place in our world today since the election of President-elect Donald Trump. And we see the rioting in the streets. We're seeing all of these things going on. We know the rioters are being paid to do what they're doing. So there's a lot of things going on that we're going to be discussing today. And I want you to stay tuned, call your neighbors and your friends. They're going to want to hear this program today. John, welcome.
Miss Francis, it's great to be here. Along with Dave, I'll also be teaching in the pre-camp. My session's Wednesday at 10:30, and I'll be dealing with healing. I'm going to touch on healing of the nations and also physical healings, and as well as relationships that need healed. We got an hour to speak, so hopefully the people can come and be ready to learn and listen. I know Dave and myself and many of the other speakers are excited. Plus, camp meeting itself begins Wednesday night.
Right.
The actual service here at Family
And so
Worship
your
Center.
service is what time?
10:30 on Wednesday.
Okay, and Dave, yours is?
1 o'clock on Monday.
Okay, great.
And they are taking place in the FCA auditorium, the Crossfire auditorium. We have moved from the college area. Right.
Yes, that's going to be much better. Great. More people can be more comfortably seated in there. Okay, that is wonderful then. John, this is what we're going to be discussing today. Most of the people probably have heard of the New World Order. And I think you said this morning it's been changed, the name has, which happens quite often, to global governance.
Correct. We want to express to the people that many times when this topic is brought up, immediately they default to thinking conspiracy.
Right.
And I want them to push that thinking aside because they've been programmed to think that way.
Yes,
they've been taught that anything that would involve discussing the potential for the world to cooperate and create a one world government or global governance to rule the rule from a centralized global government is nonsense and conspiracy. But we're going to prove, not just today, but in, like you said, maybe several of these programs, the history, and I've got lots of quotations in individuals that have been in high public positions and advisory positions here in the U.S. and other parts of the world, organizations that have been brought into existence and still are in existence that are seeking to create a one world order and a new world order, as it's referred to. President Bush spoke of that many times and many other leaders in the world. What is the New World Order? What are they trying to accomplish with the New World Order? And I think if the people can understand that there is a strategy that is trying to be fulfilled and met as a goal in our lifetime to facilitate this, they will understand more what I call intermittent strategies and stepping stones that are being used to destabilize countries, to transition populations of people to move from one place to another, to create enough havoc to force the governments to step in and solve the problems on behalf of the people, when in reality those things that they brought up were designed to do that so that the people would cry, you need to do something.
Right. And John, we just heard recently Hillary Clinton made the very same statement that she would be, personally, she would welcome a hemispheric world without borders.
Without borders.
That's the very same thing that we're talking about today. So they're using different terminology sometimes, but it's all going back to the same source. Glad you mentioned we won't get conspiracy theories out of our
This is not a
minds.
conspiracy theory.
We're not talking about that.
And we want to say this up front as well, very important. Satan does have a plan
Yes,
that
it
he's
does.
trying to use and facilitate through humanity to accomplish his goal to overthrow the kingdom of God. Lucifer, Satan, was given credit by an individual who wrote the book Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky, saying that he successfully was the one that should be recognized as one that overthrew the first organized effort to destroy God's government, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing what the book says. But I've got lots of books, lots of quotes as we go through this series to show that many advisors to organizations and politicians were very actively involved and are actively involved in creating
Presently.
this new world, one world order.
Right. And the one thing I want to point out, Donald Trump is not presently involved in this.
Not that we are aware of in any way.
And and that's why we have the turmoil that has been taking place after his election.
Yeah.
He has the ability, if he stays just like he is now, that he's going to turn this thing upside down. And what they had planned cannot be brought to fruition through his leadership. So it's an interesting time. I consider it's a dangerous time for him as well.
As we look at the Bible, and I think this is important, a couple things that come to mind. Jesus, when he was in his earthly ministry, Satan, of course, took him into the temptation, into the wilderness, and when he was in the desert, 40 days and 40 nights he fasted. Satan offered him the kingdoms of the world. The Bible says that Satan right now is the prince of the power of the air. Now, he's the god of the world system. The earth is the Lord's. But there's no such thing as the idea that Satan has been locked away for 1,000 years. Many Protestants have fallen prey to an theology called amillennialism that claims that Satan no longer is in the earth. He's locked away and the kingdom of God reigns in the hearts of people. No, Satan is out there actively tempting and deceiving the nations and deceiving the people, and all millennialists are deceived themselves to not think that temptation comes from Satan. God does not tempt any man, James says. Every man is tempted when he is enticed of his own lust, and then sin is conceived, and then sin brings forth death. God tests, Satan tempts. So this temptation and Satan's power is to try to work through individuals like Adolf Hitler, to bring them to a place where they will fulfill his plan, to bring destruction. What is Satan's plan? To eradicate the Jews? Because if he can remove the Jews from the earth, then Satan would succeed in making the promises of God that were given to the I'll say Hebrews, but really it was given to a Gentile, Abraham. And then it was passed on to the seed of Abraham, which was Isaac, then Jacob, and Jacob was called Israel. Then through Israel, the law was given. The law of God was given to Moses. And then, of course, because of their rejection of the Messiah, he set them aside and he brought in the church. That does not negate the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David, and others. Therefore, if those promises can be destroyed, that makes God a liar, and that will exalt Lucifer, or Satan as he's now known as the dominating king of this earth, which will destroy mankind. That is Satan's plan. So he has dominion of the world system. And the Bible talks about the world system. I won't defer to that now. So there is a plan of Satan to disrupt, destroy, or nullify the promises of God. But the church's responsibility is to fight against that by spreading the light, going into the world and preach the gospel. We're called to win people to Christ so that they can now be taken from the kingdom of darkness and put into the kingdom of the Son, Jesus Christ. Paul would refer to that in the book of Colossians. So our responsibility is to restrain and hold back this tide of darkness. In fact, he that letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, Paul would say in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, referring to the church holding back the judgment of God against the world for its unbelief. But the New World Order is nothing new. We could trace it back to many, many centuries, but if we do that, we could spend months on the teaching because there's so much involved. but there have been many occasions where we have seen Satan try to work through governments, through tyrants, to bring some sense of domination, but never in history have they been able to succeed with that. England, for example, covered 80% of the world at one time. Only 20% of the world's countries did not have influence or domination by England at one time, because England could not get that much loyalty, or could they possibly militarily protect or secure that much land. So now today, we have the potential for cooperation in the world like we've never done. Communication, technology, and ideology are not too far apart. We have found ways to bring some type of understanding towards modern acceptance of what we call diversity, tolerance, although those that are called tolerant are intolerant of anybody that doesn't tolerate them.
I agree with that.
So, I know that's a little tricky way I said that, but that's in essence what they believe. So let's look at some modern history of how this has progressed, because we see the ideology in the United States was greatly attacked by European thought. Our universities, which used to teach the Bible as part of their curriculum to enable an individual to be self-governed, which is what our Constitution warrants. As individuals have self-control and are self-governed, they will do that which is right. Unfortunately, when these changes came into our universities, quickly we saw the Bible removed. Humanistic psychology began to take precedence. Philosophy became prominent, and the great thinkers, who really weren't thinkers at all, they were unsaved, unregenerate individuals that tried to use earthly wisdom. Oh, Satan is the god of the world system, so they ended up becoming prey, P-R-E-Y, to the philosophies of the world system, and that's what permeated the educational system, and we'll deal with that as we go through this series. Great thinkers, going back to even Horace Mann, who's considered the father of our modern educational system, John Dewey, who was really nothing more than an atheist who wanted to promote humanism as the new religion. I say new religion because a religion is a faith system, and you've got to believe this stuff to walk in it. But our school systems, which had public government school systems, as I call them today, they have our children captive all week long. And they're able to succeed at giving the humanistic principles of psychology as the main system of thought and development. But let's look at some advisors as we begin this little session, Miss Francis. Take, for example, Colonel Edward House, Mandel House. He was an advisor to Woodrow Wilson. House had great influence not only on Woodrow Wilson and his progressive agenda, but Wilson, by the end of his term, sought the prospects of what was called a League of Nations. We saw an effort after World War I, during World War I, and after World War I, to try to create some type of League of Nations where the world would come together, cooperate together, bring some type of centrality to stop all future wars. That was the hope of this, so that there would be peace. So their mantra is peace. Ironically, in the book of Daniel, in chapter 8, Daniel says that when the Antichrist comes, he will conquer through peace. Meaning he will use that means to be that which the people will submit to. Now, even though the Antichrist isn't here, the spirit of Antichrist has reigned since the time of John the Apostle, he would say. But President Mandel House published his book or writing called Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he promotes, quote, socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx.
Wow.
So that was his agenda, and that was his objective, was socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a strong proponent of communism. Socialism is the road to communism. And if we can create socialistic principles, a socialist society, which includes redistribution of wealth, which includes an oligarchy deciding for the masses of the people what's in their best benefits, and the people submitting to a government to cooperate with it, they will succeed at this domination.
And that's where we are today.
Oh, we're right there.
We are right there today. Look who the Democratic Party, I've got to interject this, John. The Democratic Party is looking at as chairman. the man they're talking about bringing in, a man that has communist ties, Muslim ties, not American. So we see this plan has just come right that you're talking about.
Yes.
Has come back right back down through the ages. And we're in the middle of it today. Actually, I think this election where Donald Trump was just elected was going to be the culmination of that dream.
Should Hillary Clinton been elected, because she is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Right.
She is a strong advocate for globalism, and she will part and parcel participate. And as we go through this, I'll probably spend more time quoting her husband and looking at what he did in the relationships that he had that clearly indicate his developmental process of participating in this global.
Exactly. Okay, let's go ahead. I have so
After
much I want to say here, but let's go ahead. I don't want to get off.
The first thing that took place of great significance was the formation of a Federal Reserve Bank. That took place, ironically, a year after the Philip Drew Administrator was written by House, the Federal Reserve Bank. And Mandel House was greatly instrumental in being involved in this process. And this private cartel of bankers that represent the money centers of the world met at Jekyll Island to create a system that they could centralize the banking, taking it away from the Treasury of the United States. And this is what the very founders of our country fought over, was do we have a central bank like England or do we not have it? In fact, the very establishment of our two prominent political parties were founded over the debate, should we have an open market banking? Because once you find the individual that has control of the money system, he doesn't care what anything else does. And I look at a quotation from Rothschild years ago who says that I care not who, what the laws are of a country, if who controls the money supply is the one who is going to successfully run the country. We have an enormous amount of power given to our central banks, and they cooperate internationally with each other. They've also allowed the great increase of debt to occur that has taken place, the inflation that has affected our country. This is very important. Now, Wilson, as I said at the end of World War I, proposed the League of Nations in a speech before the League to enforce what we would call world peace. And, of course, the signing of the armistice at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month on November 11th of 1918 is important. That number 11, I'm not going to deal with it now, but is a very prominent number with these that are globalists that are seeking a one world order. And it even goes into those that are participating in a cult, the occult organizations. Why is that important? Because, Miss Francis, Satan has spoken through individuals that they believed their vision and their empowerment came from these powers, or these so-called mentors. They were referred to by many different names. Alice Bailey had some. She was a Satanist. I'll deal with her a little more in this series. Adolf Hitler, Guido von List, greatly trained him in the black arts. And it was said at his death, he was found with a book called The Secret Doctrines by Madame Blavatsky, who herself had received great visions and visitations from these disembodied spirits. And I'll deal again more with that as we go. 1919, prominent British and American personalities established organizations such as the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England. That organization still exists today in the United States with the help of an arrangement by, again, Colonel Mandel House. We were created an organization called the International Affairs into the Council of Foreign Relations. That organization was established in the U.S. So with Mandel House, there were a number of individuals, including economists John Maynard Keynes and other what we call Fabianists. Just so that people understand, Fabianists are communists. Their symbol is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes, it is.
What they promote is not so much a revolutionary takeover of society by war, but you do it more subtly through education, through propaganda, through indoctrination. So you change a society by generation, gradually. It's a stealthy, meaning under the radar type approach, because the revolutionary approach was not succeeding with well-industrialized established nations like the US, we were blocking the globalists from succeeding in creating a new world order. The US was opposed to it when it was introduced that we participate in a League of Nations. That greatly frustrated, of course, some of our leaders at the time, including Woodrow Wilson. But as we progress, we'll begin to see how they infiltrated. And that's a big important word, because today we have ministers that claim they brought in their doctrine stealthy. They came in under the radar.
Right.
And these individuals belong to organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, and they speak at international enclaves where these so-called Fabianists and other communist, socialist-minded individuals cooperate together to try to move the world towards a new world order. When you look at purpose-driven, what that book really is, the purpose of being driven is to drive us into socialism and communism. Now, I know
And
people
fits exactly in
Yeah.
with this agenda
absolutely,
that we're talking
it's
about.
part of it.
Right.
It's part of it.
That's right. And
That's
that's
why-
what I want you, the listeners, to get the true picture of what we're dealing with today. It's very important that you understand what we are dealing with as Christians in the world today. That's besides what our government is dealing with and what our newly elected president is going to be dealing with. And I'm not sure if he even understands all that is going on. He does not belong to the secret societies. He's not a part of the good old boys club,
Right.
but yet you can't help, I feel concerned, because he's got people around him that is a part,
Yeah.
could I say, I don't want to use the term of the global conspiracy, because it's people, Europe, the elites,
Right.
it's people in America, and they're the ones that's trying to put the people of the United States and the world into abject poverty.
Yeah.
And then them have the riches and all the freedoms of the world.
Case in point, he met with Henry Kissinger the other day.
Yes.
If he would know who Henry Kissinger was and is, he would have said, I prefer not to meet with you. I think the globalists are doing everything they can to bring influence.
On him.
Now, maybe it's not a threatening influence, but it's a way of trying to find, quote, common ground. I'm so sick of hearing that term. Let's find common ground. That's of the devil. That's part of the Hegelian principle. Let's find something that we can agree upon, but the goal is not to get that individual that's opposed to you to move towards the way you think. It's to get you to move towards the way they think. So common ground is always trying to find some type of compromise, which is what the Hegelian principle does. Thesis, antithesis brings a concession to the middle. And the middle always moves to the left, it never moves to the right. How do you know? Well, just look where we were 200 years ago and look where we are today. The center today is so far left compared to what it was 200 years ago, we don't even know what the right is anymore. So we don't know our right from our left. I know we got to take a break, so I'll just go ahead
Oh,
and
yeah.
pause
We
here.
sure have. I've gotten engrossed
Sure.
in this and forgot. All right, we'll be right back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to continue on with our discussion today, John.
Yeah, we're trying to give some of the modern foundation to those that were trying to implement or start what would be called a New World Order. The name, and I'll give that information in a moment, was changed to World Governance because the idea of a New World Order was being greatly criticized, and those that weren't participating were the ones that were being lambasted for it. So they changed the names to protect themselves and their agenda. But interesting enough, Francis, the world in the Council on Foreign Relations, like I said, was just developed after World War I. Royal Institute of International Affairs in England was established. These are two organizations. Their main objective is to create a one world order. World governance is their priority. When you read their books, Foreign Affairs, their magazines, read their articles on their websites, although they're veiled, if you read them carefully, you will see that is their objective. The people that participate in the organization, the people that join this organization, and many cabinet members of presidents over the years have strongly been participating and visit this organization and speak there at these enclaves. And obviously the object of their goal, little by little, using the Fabianist strategy of gradualization, in other words, you can't do this overnight, you gradually do it, is working and succeeding. In 1928, there's it was called The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution. And this was written by H.G. Wells. A lot of folks don't realize H.G. Wells was a socialist. He was a Fabianist socialist. So he believed in the overtaking of society through this gradualization, not through revolution. But in that, he says, the political world of the into open conspiracy must weaken, efface means to spread out, incorporate, supersede existing governments. The open conspiracy is the natural inheritor of socialist and communist enthusiasms. So this idea was to gradually efface. People hear that term when a woman is about to have a baby, she effaces. It spreads out, it flattens. So this linear or this spreading out of communism is a gradual teaching or socialist process that they look to do. And as it began, they felt, the globalists and socialists, that Russia would probably have more success because it did have a successful revolution. It was in a position to dictate what the people would hear and what the people would know. And anytime you have a tyrant or a communist country, the people really don't have access to information. So they are indoctrinated to believe by what they only hear. That's true, for example, in North Korea. Folks that have escaped or left North Korea that speak about what was taught, they knew nothing about what was going on in the world. So what was natural to them is all the propaganda that had been shoved down their throats. So 1931, students at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow were taught, and I'll quote, "One day we shall start to spread the most theatrical peace movement the world has ever seen." So in their minds, they were being taught that this communist approach is the spreading of world peace. Now, since I've been in existence, I've always heard about the United Nations. And you, of course, probably as well, in your generation.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
All it's been talked about that organization is peace. Yet we've had less peace in the world than we've ever had before. Even last year, there was a 650% increase, according to a recent statistic, I got it in my writings here, in terrorism. There were a few less deaths, but a significant increase in the number of terrorist acts that were committed. 29,000 plus deaths attributable to terrorism. The world is not becoming a better place to live. Christianity is not taking over the world and dominating society as the Seven Mountains claim to do. And it will not do that because that's what it's not called to do that. The government will be upon his shoulders, and when he returns, then he will rule and reign in peace for 1,000 years. I bring that up because there's so many people, Miss Francis, that do not have a proper understanding of Bible eschatology or end time events, that they're missing maybe the greatest time in history right now that's ever been. The prospects of God returning Israel to being a nation once again. And this plays into this global movement, by the way, significantly. The idea of the world becoming one and united together, basically saying that we will ourselves become accountable to ourselves and push God out. That's really what this movement is about. It's creating a society without God, no different than the Tower of Babel.
Very openly, they state,
yes,
we've got to get rid of Christianity.
And isn't it ironic that the very name of some of these organizations, Open Society, all these organizations take on names that clearly display what they're intending to do.
But that's a seductive spirit.
Sure it is. Sure it is.
A very it sounds good. It sounds right. Open. That means, they don't have anything hidden.
But they're able to allure, and that's what Peter says here. I'm going to find it right quick. In the scriptures pertaining to these false prophets. He says, "And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you." Yeah. So they deceive you. In fact, Paul would say the same thing in Ephesians chapter 4 in a different way. He would say, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive.
Seducing spirits.
Seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. You're absolutely right. Paul would say that to Timothy. This is what's ruling the world system, is it's not an honest system. That's why we can have a president who I found they quoted all the lies that he had in one particular website. It was interesting because I began to read it. And there was well over 1,000 lies, but no one's calling him on the lies. But that lie is deception because they're saying something you want to hear, but they're giving you something you don't want.
And the thought behind that is if you speak a lie long enough or enough times, then it becomes the truth. It gets in people's minds, and it's in their minds.
That is exactly what succeeded for the German juggernaut, is they said a lie, and the fact is, a big lie gained more ground than a little lie does, and they succeeded in that. But as we progress through the years, I look at, for example, 1932, there was a number of books that were published. This is when all this was being launched. Ironically, notice that this is when FDR began to bring in many of his socialist concepts to the United States, referring to them as benefits, by the way. But toward Soviet America, this was a book written by William Foster. We've dealt with him before many times. He's the head of the Communist Party USA. He was also greatly involved in many other organizations. He, along with others, Dr. Harry S. Ward, we mentioned his name in past programs, was a theological teacher at Union Theological Seminary, greatly in cooperation with the Humanist Manifesto, the first one, which I'll address in a minute, in terms of writing it and co-signing it, along with Dewey, sought to change the way seminaries think and teach with the goal of providing teaching on social justice, which is just another term for communism, redistribution of wealth. So the church was infected, the Protestant church was infected, the Roman Catholic Church, by the way, was neck deep in these concepts, so they are involved in it as well. So you have the Protestants, the Roman Catholics, and even the Muslims were greatly introduced. That's why you don't see antagonism between the Islamic nations that have embraced Russia and China, because they can cooperate ideologically through these processes. Again, this series will deal with those in more detail. But he was the head of the Communist Party. Foster indicates that a national Department of Education would be one of the means used to develop a new socialist society in the U.S. So it was a communist who came up with the idea of creating and having a Department of Education. I said it on Insight before your program today. We don't need a Department of Education.
That's right.
Now, President-elect Trump has selected Larry Arnn, who's the president of Hillsdale College, to be the secretary of that particular department. I don't know if he's elected him officially, but his name has come up. He's a strong opponent in opposition to, of course, Common Core.
Right. But, I have to say this, I did hear President-elect Trump make the statement that we don't need the Department of Education, and we need a much smaller Department of Environmentalism.
We don't need that either.
No, and it was things that we would agree with. I don't know if he'll follow through with that, though.
These departments are modern. For example, the EPA, I think, came into existence in and around 1973. Interesting, the same year that the Trilateral Commission came into existence with Zbigniew Brzezinski and Rockefeller. We'll deal with them in this series along the way as well. But these organizations gave them power to put rules and regulations that circumvent our representative government. So they can establish rules and regulations aside from Congress, which impose and impede business in the U.S., which is what has been happening. They're not good for America. They're not good for anything. Put them in the United Nations and push them out into the ocean. Total waste of time. So the New World Order by F.S. Marvin describes the League of Nations as the first attempt at a New World Order. So if you look at the different authors, you look at the different writings, they don't hide what the objectives are or what the intentions are of past failures to create a new world order. Dare the School Build a New Social Order. It was published by author George Counts and asserts, and I'll quote, "The teachers," listen to this carefully, "the teachers should deliberately reach for power and then make the most of their conquest in order to influence the social attitudes, ideals, and behavior of the coming generation." Does that sound like the fulfillment and culmination of what we're seeing being taught in our public schools today? Listen to this. The growth of science and technology has carried us into a new age where ignorance must be replaced by knowledge, competition by cooperation, trust in providence by careful planning, and private capitalism by some form of social economy. Let me read that again. The growth of science and technology has carried us into a new age where ignorance must be replaced by knowledge, competition. Now, they're referring to ignorance so that people understand it in context. Those that exhibit faith in God. That is what ignorant is.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of technology and growth in that proponent now gives us knowledge. Well, isn't that what Satan told Adam and Eve?
Mm.
That you will have knowledge, you
That's
will
right.
know, and you will become like a god? The growth of science and technology has carried us into a new age where ignorance must be replaced by knowledge, competition by cooperation. Competition has always brought out the best in people, and it's always brought the lower prices because you can make something better for cheaper, and competition wins because people will buy your product that way.
Principle of capitalism.
Precisely. Trust in providence, now this is your trust in the Lord's providence, by careful planning and private capitalism by some form of social economy. Now notice, trust in providence is replaced by careful planning. All of these social engineered church growth programs have their origins in these concepts, from purpose-driven to the government of 12 to the cell structure to the covering, all these movements that we covered in great detail years ago on your programs, and it was a blessing to be part of that training and teaching we gave the people, clearly shows that the church bought hook, line, and sinker and has been pulled down as a result of this and is being reeled in now to be an instrument to deceive the people into accepting this new concept and new world order. Plan for Peace by American Birth Control League founder Margaret Sanger. I know you did a program recently on her, did a great job covering her back in 1921, was published. She calls for the coercive sterilization, mandatory segregation, and rehabilitative concentration camps for all dysgenic stocks, including blacks, Hispanics, American Indians, and interestingly enough, Catholics, Roman Catholics.
Really?
And then,
I didn't know that last.
They, because of their dogmatic stance towards certain things, especially
Abortion.
opposition to abortion, would prohibit her and the globalists from moving down the path of creating a purified breed of humanity. No different than what Adolf Hitler was doing in a microcosm in Europe with the Jews, the Gypsies, and others that opposed him. 1933, we finally see the creation of the Humanist Manifesto. I brought that up before. Dr. Harry S. Ward, we have John Dewey, a signer of this. He called for synthesizing of all religions and a socialized and cooperative economic order. The synthesizing. Now, isn't that when we hear the term, let's find common ground? I'm not out to find common ground with somebody. Thus saith the Lord, if you don't like it, take a walk.
Right.
I don't mean to be mean, but that's love.
Right.
Hatred says, I'm willing to accept anything that you do wrong and let you continue in that wrong so it'll ultimately destroy you. Because that's what sin will do. If we don't tell people that they have to eschew and turn from sin and walk in the paths of righteousness, they're going to find themselves destroyed. Then what kind of loving person am I? That's why I oppose many of these church growth movements that are indoctrinating the people, taking them away from Christ and crucified, and taking away personal accountability. See, the church has moved from taking people from personal accountability to God, which is what the preacher's supposed to do. Dave, Jim, myself, you, Miss Francis, your husband and family, we're way showers.
Right.
We show them the way to go to God, the way to go to Him is through Jesus Christ, and the way to go to Christ is what He did for us at the cross. That's a way shower. Now it's up to them to embrace it and to walk in it and to accept it and to grow in the knowledge and the grace of Jesus Christ. We can't force them to do it, nor should we try to force them to do it. But these movements, they are planned out, they instruct, they teach, and what is then monitored is the person's adherence to those programs. That is not Christianity. That is demonic. That's why purpose driven was not birthed by a man who had godly principles. It was birthed by a man
Right.
influenced by philosophies and demon spirits.
Right, and that's what we're dealing with
Precisely.
today. Influenced by Satan. Okay.
So looking a little further, co-signer C.F. Potter of the Humanist Manifesto said this: education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every American public school is a school of humanism. So they declared, and Dave knows this, he's been in the educational system, I guess, mostly all your career, that you see a movement towards humanistic principles, and the religion of humanism is psychology. They use that as the means as a solution to your problems versus going to God. So the world has its system, it has its way, and it develops things accordingly. Now, we mentioned H.G. Wells before, but in 1933, he wrote The Shape of Things to Come. And he predicts a Second World War in 1940, originating from a German-Polish dispute, not far off. After 1945, he said there would be an increasing lack of public safety in criminally infected areas. He also predicted the plan for a modern world state would succeed on its third attempt in and around 1980 and come out of something that occurred in Basra, Iraq. This is what he predicted then. Well, it wasn't in and around those years that we saw Iraq take a very significant place in the world, and a little later even a far more significant place in the world, of course, with what happened with Saddam Hussein and I said insane because I believe he was, but still. 1934, the externalization of the hierarchy. This was written by Alice Bailey. This is what I was talking about earlier. She created an organization called Lucifer Trust. The name was so offensive they had to change it to Lucius Trust because it was too, Lucifer Trust, who's going to
Tell the
believe this?
truth about it.
She was said to have followed the works channeled to her by a Tibetan master known as Dewal Kul, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But Bailey used the phrase points of light. In fact, the term President Bush quoted, 1,000 points of lights, actually is attributable to her. The point represents a year, 1,000 points is a millennium, and it has to do with 1,000 points of light is 1,000 years of millennial rule by Lucifer or Satan, dominating the world and having power to run the planet. So she believed so strongly in this that organizations were developed. A new group called World Servers was put into existence, and the organization marked the beginning of the organizing of men and women into a group that they called the New Order. With progress defined by service, the world of brotherhood, the forces of light, and out of the spoilization of all existing culture and civilization came the idea for a new world
And
order.
now we have occultists in this.
Yeah. That claim they received their vision. Annie Besant, who preceded her as the head of the Theosophy group, which was started by Madame Blavatsky, believed that they had these avatars that appeared to them, literally appeared to them, and gave them this vision. Now, Dale Carnegie, everybody reads his books and thinks he's this great whatever. He funded Napoleon Hill to write a book about successful people. Think and Grow Rich. But in this book, not only the book, but the whole series and the teachings of Think and Grow Rich, there was a whole course. And I had to take it years ago in management, 30 years ago. So I'm very familiar with this. You actually, and I did not participate in this, of course, I can't as a Christian believer. You believe in contemplative imaginary thinking, where you in your mind invite these spirits, whomever they may be, it could even be Jesus, to come and speak to you so that you will have spiritual guidance. Well, in these books, Think and Grow Rich, this is exactly what Napoleon Hill had happened to him. He had a round table of people, and folks like
Very wealthy
former
people.
presidents and wealthy people came to him from the dead and spoke to him in his
At his
imagination.
board meetings. At his board meeting. It wasn't other people there, but he had those board meetings
Right.
with the spirits
With the
of
spirits.
these dead men.
Yeah.
Now
Now,
think about what we're saying.
this is demonic, and those in the Old Testament that practiced this in Israel were to be stoned to death.
Right.
Now,
You know, John, I read those books years ago, and it got so ridiculous, but I forced myself to read them because I wanted the knowledge of what we were dealing with here in the world and the world system.
Yeah.
And you see, like you mentioned, Alice Bailey.
Yeah.
You see Satan involved in this all the way through, from the Garden of Eden, as you mentioned, the seduction, and how that they pull in all of this occult thinking into what we're dealing with today. And we're headed in the direction to where you're going to understand why today in 2016, what we're dealing with the immigration issue and with many things that we're dealing with today. It all flows through this line that we're trying to show you today. I hope you're following along with us.
Look how this ties in now. This is it's horrible but fascinating. When we look at Robert Mueller, who was the Assistant Secretary of the General of the United Nations at the time that Alice Bailey was writing this particular book, notice the book deals with the externalization of the hierarchy. It's a spiritual hierarchy. We can see that challenge in Ephesians chapter 6. I'll touch on that in a moment. But Mueller now is going to create a world curriculum. Lucius Trust, Lucifer Trust,
Right.
was an NGO, a non-governmental organization tied to the United Nations. And in this, Mueller would create or credit the creation of his World Core Curriculum. There's some evidence that the Common Core Curriculum actually goes back to this World Core Curriculum for education. And what's it based on? The underlying teachings that Alice Bailey received from Joel Kuhl on the subject of indoctrination, or I call it doctrinization, but educating for a one world, or as they call it, New World Order. So these terms were used or introduced to us by occultists and accepted by the world leaders and brought into organizations, United Nations, by the